You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, joined by Adam Coleman, one of the guys who I've known for a fairly long time, at least in the educational space, in the family-oriented space. I don't think I had ever read, I know we'd published a few of your things at Chalkboard Review before, but I don't think that I'd ever sat down and read some of your longer form stuff. And then you sent over The Children We Left Behind. I'm going to be right up front with you. I didn't put it down out of boredom, which is, given how distracted that I am and how quickly I get bored with things, that's about the highest praise I can give a book. I sat down and I was like, I could be reading right now. And so it was a really, really phenomenal walk through the decline of the appreciation for the nuclear family. Obviously talking a little bit about your own personal story as well. Well, not a little bit. And it was a really great window into the necessity for, this is going to sound so like introduction speech at like a hotel conference room thing, but like a really great argument for why investment in the nuclear family is such a crucial thing in our society.
Yeah.
So first of all, thanks for getting this out there.
No, thank you. And I do appreciate you giving me your version of a high praise. I do appreciate that.
I don't know. Well, you never know how to like talk about serious books because I love novels.
Okay.
And so like a novel is like a different kind of book to me than settling into a book about somebody's story and about why they believe certain things and about like a short history of certain events. And so it's a different kind of appeal. Like it appeals to a different part of your mind. So if I sit down and go, oh man, I couldn't put it down until I was all the way through. Well, then you're going to be like, come on. Like it's I liked it a lot.
Good.
And I did want to read it, but I'm also, not going to sit here and go, oh, I was like reading it in the shower and while I was driving and like stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, definitely don't read while you're driving. No, I'm really glad to hear you say that. My writing style has been featuring storytelling since my first book. That was like my first like real writing venture was my book. And so, like you said, there's a message in it intertwined into my personal story as a child. And I didn't want to write a memoir because like I'm not like Tom Cruise or something. Like I'm not a famous person, but I just wanted to use bits and pieces of my life as an example of what I'm talking about, the illustration. And I think what makes my story even better is because like you always hear the craziest story, someone who ended up on the streets and they're drug addicts and ended up in jail. Like these are like very extreme things. But I think my story is very relatable because I feel like a lot of people know someone who was like me, right? Suffering in silence, grew up without their father, seems to be okay, right? Relatively so, but it's kind of a mystery because you look at me on the surface and you're like, he's fine. He turned out okay. But I'm opening up that relatable child that you're familiar with. Maybe it's your cousin, a family friend. Well, they're suffering in silence. Like they're going through all of these things and you have no idea what they're going through. And I think because we always look at the outcome, right? You're an adult, you turned out fine, everything is good. And we ignore the pathway there because that pathway is important because throughout every path in someone's life, all you need is a slight event to detour, right? Some particular event to go in a direction that you can't come back from. And that's why I wanted to have that chapter about suicidal ideation, which is a recurring theme in my life. And it only took one moment to change my life, to end my life. So I think it's really important to kind of highlight how very common my story is. We just don't realize it.
I'm really glad that you kind of started off there because if you've been in education, if you have a family member that's committed suicide, then every time you hear of another suicide, every time you hear about someone who is extremely depressed, I don't mean to make this at all sound self-centric. You relive part of the experience of learning about and suffering through the other individual's suicide.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make, like, it's all about you, but my uncle Scott on my mom's side, he committed suicide when I was a little kid. And I loved him to pieces. And it wasn't until I was a lot older that I understood, why he had done so. And, my dad, like internalizing, like, oh, he called me one night and I didn't pick up the phone. What would have happened if I would have just picked up the phone?
Yeah.
And I was busy. And I had a former student a couple of years ago who was a good kid, committed suicide. A friend of mine who actually checked up on me during the Indianapolis public school scandal committed suicide just this last year. And every time, and I hate to say every time as though it's a repetitive event, but the amount of suicide ideation that is in our culture and how deeply normal it has become is discordant with how much it still drags every person through it. And when we were in education college, and I'm sorry, Adam, I don't mean to be so right off the topic, right off the bat. I'm just glad that you wrote about it, because it was one of these things that I didn't understand when I was younger, and I didn't understand when I was in teacher college. And then when I finally got into the classroom and I saw suicidal ideation spread, and it preyed on single parent homes. It preyed on alternate guardian homes who were raised by their grandparents. And we're either stuck on the end justifies the means, like you said, or we're stuck on this concept of we just zoom in on the process. It's like the other end of the pendulum, where only thing that matters is how something is being done, and we don't look at where we're going. So for you to pick that apart from your own experience was something that my wife and I talked about consistently while I was reading it, and now she was reading it.
Yeah, the aspect of hope and losing hope, that's the part of life. If it's gone, that just opens the door to just ending it all, because whether we realize it or not, there's a reason why we wake up every day. When you're really depressed, you ask yourself, why don't I just kill myself? Right?
There's no purpose means that there's nothing anchoring you here.
There's nothing anchoring you here. Every time I do something, it doesn't work. No one loves me. I've been abandoned. And every time I try to pull myself up, someone knocks me down, or I knock myself down, right? And so it's that eating away at hope for a child or even for an adult. But there's something that's constantly eating away at them. And that was my struggle. And in the book, obviously I talk about going into a mental hospital at the age of 8. And while I was expressing like I wanted to die, I don't think at 8 I understood what that meant. I just wanted it to stop. Whatever it was, I wanted it to stop. And I think that's the only way I knew how to express that. But I was essentially abandoned by my father at that point, and we were moving around constantly. So, in a couple years, we were in 3 states. And I think by that point, I was homeless once. And so there was just a lot of instability. We were staying with people who didn't want us there. It was just a lot that was going on. And it's a lot for an 8-year-old to go through. And I snapped. The interesting thing about writing this book was that it allowed for an opportunity for me to talk to my mother and my sister for the first time about certain things. And just like, I remember this. Is this what you remember? Does this match up? And them telling me certain things that I didn't even know that I said or that I did. But having my mom tell me that her 8-year-old boy said, if you love me, you help me die. Like as a parent, now my son is 19. I just couldn't imagine my son saying that to me. and how that would affect me. So I think throughout this experience, I also thought about like my mother's perspective, what she went through, trying to figure out how to deal with this, um, and how much hurt she went through to have me admitted into a mental hospital. These are very uncomfortable things to talk about. The mental struggles of children. But it's even worse when you look at, well, what's the reason why children struggle with mental issues? And what I found is that most children struggle with mental issues because they're responding to their environment. They're not, most kids aren't born with depression or anything like that.
Right.
Yet it's something that is developed because they're responding to their environment. They don't have answers as to what's going on. They don't know why mommy and daddy no longer live with each other. And no matter how you try to explain it in an adult way, that child brain can't understand it the same way that you do, which is why kids often come back, it's my fault. And so for me, if I was even thinking about my father or where he was, I can't comprehend at the age of 8 why I feel this way, why I don't see my father anymore, why we're living with all these people.
Right.
So there's so many unanswered questions. And even if I had those answers as a child, I wouldn't fully understand, which is why
You wouldn't know what to do with them.
I wouldn't know what to do with them. The most important part for parents is to protect children, but even more so to protect them from adult issues. And what happens when you let those adult issues hit those kids, that's when they start falling apart because they're not built for it.
I'm often bothered by the clamor to give children adult agency.
Yeah.
And, we think of this in terms of the really horrible things that they could run into. We think of the negative things that could happen up front right away that are detrimental. We talk about sexual abuse, we talk about physical abuse, we talk about all of these large scale things that adults find unique and horrific.
Yeah.
But we don't consider, at least very often, especially not one who hasn't gone through it, like you have, about giving children adult agency forces them to process things, or they can't process them, forces them to hold the weight of heavy process items, emotionally, socially, etc., on their own shoulders. Because there are some things that you cannot, some of these issues require very deep articulation and like backing up and going back over the issue again to find the right words to describe it and thinking through things that you've gone through to process events, etc. And I'm just saying etc. because I'm having trouble articulating it, much less a child
Right.
who doesn't understand any of these things and can't. They physically can't. And yet, because they've been given this agency and they're being told, oh, well, it's actually very good if you process all of these extra things. That causes lifelong trauma. And that can't just be wiped away.
No, you're absolutely right. You can't just wipe that away. Bringing kids into adult matters is probably the worst thing. One of the, I should say, probably top 2 worst things that I see that is very commonplace. I've seen situations where parents divorce. One parent tells the kid intimate details about why they're being divorced. Daddy cheated on mommy, right? How's the kid supposed to interpret that? Should he now hate his father because he loves his mother, but he's supposed to love his father, but his father hurt his mother? How does he comprehend that? These are very adult matters that a lot of parents put onto their kids. Another big thing is that they make their kids their friends. And their kid is not your friend. Your child is not your friend. Your role as a parent is much greater than a friend. A friend is on equal level. You're my friend. I can't tell you what to do. I have no authority over you. And so because people see, well, friend is a good word. So I want my kid to be my friend. But you start treating them like your friend and you start telling them adult things like they are your friend and they can't handle it. And you make them far more responsible for things that they shouldn't be responsible for.
I'm getting really sick of this Gilmore Girls culture in which people think that like, oh, the mom and her daughter are friends, and so that's what I want to be. And like, don't get me wrong, again, like there is an age you will reach in which your parents are more like your friends than they are your parents. But when I was a kid, you know, my parents weren't my buddies, weren't my pals. And I look at children's media today, but also children's media that was starting to become popular in kind of the middle, late 90s into the aughts, where it was all about giving kids agency under the guise of, oh, this is how they process their emotions and how they explain in real words, I am mad, I am unhappy, I am. And that sounds really good, but then you watch more of the show and it's about, okay, I'm going to go on a wild tangent here. Have you seen Bluey?
No, I have not.
Okay, so Bluey's this cartoon from Australia, really cute, really interesting animation. It's very well written, but they have gone over the same lesson with these kids like 80 times, which is, why do you as children have to listen to your parents? And it's become this long drawn out discussion where the children and the adults are on equal footing. And they keep, in multiple episodes, they keep learning this episode again and again and again, and it bothers me. It bothers me because by giving your children, like there are times of crisis where you as the parent, you need your children to listen to you. You need them to do what you say immediately because their safety is on the line. You don't have time to stop and have your kid go, but why? But I want to do this. Oh, but you saying that hurt my feelings. Like that is not at all how this is supposed to work. And you end up flirting with making your kids carry things that are unnecessary.
Right. And it also encourages children not to trust their parents.
That's a great way to frame it.
Because if you trust your parents, you don't have to question everything that they do. And what happens in a lot of these like Disney shows, the adults are bumbling idiots and the children are smart somehow. And it sets up this environment that the adults actually don't know what to do. The adults can be friendly like, and they can also be morons. So why would you trust that guy? You know, why don't you think for yourself? Be the strong girl, a strong boy who can overcome any obstacle. And I think there's a off balance here. Obviously, if your child asks you a question, when it's appropriate, you answer the question. I also don't like the culture of just do what I say for anything and everything, even if it makes no sense. If your child is curious, it's fine to answer questions, right? There's a balance here, but you still have a role as an authority figure, right? And just like we have authority figures throughout our life, you have a boss. Do you question your boss every time your boss tells you to do something? No. Maybe you pick and choose when you need to question. Why? Because they have authority and you're supposed to trust their authority, right?
But if you think about a lot of the stories, like socially over the last, or cinematically over the last couple of decades, whenever you have this kind of a conflict between parents and their kids in whether it's in a book, whether it's in a TV show or a movie, the problem that's presented is always it was the parents' fault for being too overbearing. I mean, you never have the situation where the child is the one at fault in the story because they didn't listen when they were supposed to. And so the moral of the story is, yeah, parents should, when it's necessary and when it's possible, explain why they're doing the things they're doing. But also, children's first instinct should be to listen to their parents. Case in point for this is why I hate the movie Finding Nemo. Hot take of the century. Because the entire movie Finding Nemo is about how Marlin's a bad dad and how he pushed Nemo away by like not letting him, because all of Marlin's other kids and wife are dead. Like that, like it's somehow, and it's just a weird, bizarre concept that's made cute because, Ellen DeGeneres is a dementia-ridden blue fish. But I mean, when you think about those kind of movies in the aughts that then turned into the movies of the teens, it became this weird projection of the benefits of child agency. And when I was reading your book, something that continually raked across my mind is how disrespectful that is to people who have had to live in situations where the child was foisted all of the agency. Yeah. And like you said, all they wanted it was just to stop. I just want it to stop. And once the agency's on their shoulders, there's no going back.
That's absolutely it. You give kids too much, they can't handle it. They will break.
Sorry, I didn't mean to draw like direct comparisons in a flippant way, but like they're just what was going through my mind as I was reading the book and just thinking about culture in general.
No. That makes sense. yeah, if you give kids too much, they can't handle it. And nevertheless, they shouldn't handle it. That's why we have terms like age appropriate, right? And granted, everybody has their version of age appropriate for different things, but it's at least to say that we recognize that some things are not appropriate for children. That's what age
Mhm.
appropriate is about. I also think that there's an issue within our culture of not trusting parents when it comes to the political dialogue, right? The parental rights movement. The When you listen to the people who are against parental rights, they say they go to the extreme of distrust of parents, right? Obviously, there are parents who abuse children, molest children, and things of that nature. Yes, right? But they are the extreme minority out of all parents in this country. So
Right.
why should we discount the rights of the vast majority of relatively responsible parents, right, who aren't physically abusing, sexually abusing their children? Um, why should we just, parents like myself, why should we just get rid of our agency over our children to put it over to some random teacher who doesn't know them as well as I do to dictate everything that they should learn, their moral
Mm-hmm.
framework and things of that nature? And one thing that keeps coming up as a repeat pattern is that usually the activists, the ones who are the loudest, are the ones who actually grew up in the very homes that we're talking about, where they couldn't trust their parents. They're coming from a
Mm-hmm.
position where their default position is that parents are not to be trusted. Why? Because they couldn't trust their parents. And they may have legitimate cause because their mother allowed for their stepfather to come into the home and hurt them, right? They grew up around an environment where their parents were drinking alcohol and didn't care what
Mm-hmm.
they did. Or, so they grew up around parents they couldn't trust. And so you put that person into the world as an adult, and someone says, you should default to parents being the trustworthy ones. They say, no, no, no. I've seen what that looks like, right?
Yeah. And the term is called reflexive zealotry.
Uh,
And reflexive zealotry was the original way that the ex-evangelical crew was categorized. People who had been abused in the church.
mm,
There was some guy that shouldn't have had authority that did something gross, and so then the person's response to that hurt, to that pain, to that awful situation is to then say, well, therefore, the entire system that produced this person is to blame. And also, that this position exists is also to blame.
mhm.
And by the way, just for the record, it's one of the reasons that I, in kind of a societal remedy way, because heaven knows we could go on for days and a year on the ways that we begin to remedy this. This is one of the reasons that I'm not as much for decades long prison sentences, but I'm actually for spot moment corporal punishment. And I know that carries a lot of concern and weight in how that's carried out. But the idea that your problem just kind of gets shut away and locked away in a closet for ages, and it's still there, is a lot different than actually seeing punishment and humiliation for the committed crime being meted out immediately, and therefore seeing society's direct immediate condemnation right away. I know that's, again, quite the tangent, but that's just kind of this. What you talked about is one of the reasons why reflexive zealotry feeds off of the idea that something is just kind of shut and locked away and not talked about.
Yeah. Actually, you bring up a good point when it comes to reflexive zealotry. I guess you could say my story has a bit of that. It took me decades to come to Christ. Um,
Mhm.
and like I was saying, writing this book allowed for me to talk to my mother. And last year, she told me when I was somewhere around the age of like 4 or 5, I used to walk around with the Bible and read scriptures to people. And I was like, I don't even remember that. I would have she said I had like a little suit and I would go around talking to people about Jesus. And I asked her, I was like, what happened? It's like, I don't know. And I think what happened was life happened. All those things I was telling you about happened. And the best way that I can explain it is when you're a child and the world is falling on top of you,
Hmm.
you wonder if God is the one who's pushing it down onto you. Uh,
Sure.
and it took a long time to realize that it wasn't God that was doing that. Um, but it casts all types of doubt in your mind as far as, is God real? Should I even
Well, I mean,
believe in him? Yeah.
I absolutely understand that. I mean, that's the best, and I think an analogy is just because that's just who I am, and it reminds me of the idea that people who have spent a long time, like for example, like in mining disasters and accidents, in the dark, when they come into the sunlight, it hurts their eyes. You think of the idea like if you've been in the darkness for decades, come out into the light, it burns.
Mhm.
And so there's an idea that in the darkness, the further that you go down into the darkness, though the light may be what you need, you loathe it because it shines on something else.
Mm.
I absolutely understand that reaction from kids in general. I've seen it. It breaks your heart to witness in person.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I also think that, the Bible, well, the way I see Christianity is that everything is relational. You
Hmm.
God is our Father in heaven. Father is relational, and we also have earthly fathers. And I wonder if part of me thought that my earthly father abandoned me, and so did my heavenly. And just like I don't believe in my father, my father passed away, but when I was a kid, I didn't really believe in my father. I wasn't looking forward to my father. Um, I kind of felt the same way, whether it was consciously or subconsciously. That's what ended up happening, and it took a long time for me to, one, heal, and two, be open to the possibility. For much of my like 20s into my 30s, I was agnostic, simply for the fact that I hated lying to people, telling people I was a Christian when
Right, right.
I didn't feel it in my heart. Um, but and it's detailed in the book. There was a series of events that happened, that I would call supernatural events, that opened me up and softened my heart, and eventually came to Christ. Was baptized last year.
When I think about long-term healing after, I mean, I don't want to call it like a series of horrible events, a massive, massive crisis that a child lives through every day in every possible way, from homelessness to abuse to wrestling with questions that kids should never have to wrestle with, especially at the age and when there's other a myriad number of things for kids to go through personally as it is. When I think of long-term healing, I got to ask you, how today has healing from the number of things that I just don't have the words to say, I just struggled through, would just sound so shallow.
Hmm.
The stuff that you were hit with as a kid
Yeah.
repeatedly, the long-term healing from that, how has that changed how you view healing in general? Like how does that shape how you view your relationship with Christ and healing from sin and just kind of how you think people should heal in general? I don't know if that's a decent question, but it is one that kind of near the end of the book that I had. I'm curious.
So, my healing came in stages. Um, I went to therapy throughout the years a couple times. Um, at one point, I was at a job struggling with panic attacks, and it was starting to turn into agoraphobia. But once I started going to therapy, I realized like all of these things that were built up from my childhood that I never talked about. And I think for like a month, I went like 3 times a week, and I just crying in every session because I just never dealt with it, and I never talked about it. And that was like the first step of me like actually getting genuine healing, and trying to find some sort of resolution. It's not that life became easy street after that, but it was a necessary thing, and I was with a therapist who was very empathetic. And I think, especially coming to Christ, I've become far more empathetic, even for the people I disagree with.
Mhm.
Those crazy radical leftists that are screaming. I don't get angry. I feel sad for them, because I can tell that they're hurting. They're hurting from something. Um, I actually wrote an article once talking about how I used to watch like Libs of TikTok, and those
Mhm.
the videos that would come up, but I would watch it on mute. And I'm watching their face, and they might be talking about how they're happy being, 10 genders and stuff like that, but they can't make eye contact with the camera. Their room is disheveled. They're always alone. Like I'm looking at the subtle hints that these are miserable people and they're suffering.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so like the ideology is just a way for someone to see them, right? So they can have some sort of group because they look isolated. They're chronically online because they don't have anyone to socialize with in person. So I think what's especially I've become more and more empathetic as I've gotten older.
Sure.
But especially coming to Christ, I've had more grace for people I don't agree with. I've had far less animosity towards the people, that would yell, scream, and shout towards me, or who say something negative about me, because I realize that's not coming from a place of being healed. That's coming from a place of hurt. Um, and so, plenty of people say things that I don't agree with, and I say things that they don't agree with, and we don't yell and scream and shout at each other. Why? Because they're okay, right? Um, so when you see someone behave in that particular way, I'm always curious where that comes from. And often they leave subtle clues as to where that comes from if you listen close enough to what they're saying and how they say it. Um, and many times, just like the book implies, it's coming from, decades old trauma that they've yet to deal with.
I think about one of the reasons I abhor social media is the false sense of community it gives you.
Mhm.
The idea that there are people that are encouraging you to do things on your own that are said to make you part of a community. But then when it comes time to lean on the community, those people aren't there,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you're, if you're going through a really rough time, you're not going to walk out of your home and go, man, hey, where's Tony at? Well, I'm not there. I mean, it's just one of those, issues of the modern age of we have all of these people behind keyboards that are telling everyone that they're there for them. The fact of the matter is somebody behind a keyboard, although they can send you a heartfelt message, they're just not there for you. It's one of the reasons that I encourage people to get involved in local churches and to make those local churches outreach focused, because that is what one of the core pillars of the church is supposed to be, is that solid rock that is supposed to show the peace that passes all understanding in the midst of those trials.
Yeah.
And sometimes things can't be expressed in, characters typed through a message or even a call through FaceTime, but it's just a hand on a shoulder. And
No.
again, I'm so sorry that I'm bringing cultural references to this particular conversation, but you remember the third of the Dark Knight movies when Batman finally reveals to Gordon that he knows basically like who he is, that he was Bruce Wayne. He says, sometimes the smallest acts can mean something, like giving a coat to a child who just lost his parents. And that's when Gordon's like, oh, you're Bruce Wayne. And then Batman was gone. I'm really curious to see if at the end of this like new look at parental involvement, at community involvement, if we start to see outreach focused programs that are not just affirmative and social programs, but that really do start to see the value of making kids again and just being the arm around the shoulder again.
Yeah. Um, you know, throughout my childhood, especially because we moved a lot, I didn't have a lot of male role models or, just people who would look out for me. But I do remember, just a few times where I felt like I appreciate that. Um, that actually, one of them in particular, I'll just say real quick. I had friends who were really big into cars, and his father was into cars. Like they were the guys who had like cars on their lawn and in the backyard, and they're just wrenching stuff
Yeah,
all the time. And
sure.
I had moved out of state, moved to Tennessee from New Jersey, and I went and visited this tech college for automotive work, and I was really interested, and I went to the campus and all this stuff. And so I went back and I told my friend, and then eventually saw his dad, and he was like, "Hey, Adam has something he wants to tell you." I was like, "Yeah, I think I want to go and become a mechanic and do auto body work." And he looked at me. He's like, "That's not you."
Ah,
and
ah.
and I was like, "Damn!" Like he just snapped it right in half. But you know what? The next day and the day after that and the day after that, I thought about it and I was like, "Damn, he's right. He's absolutely right." And I'm so glad he told me that. And I think about that all the time because that isn't me. I'm actually not the guy who wants to be on his back in awkward positions all day long. Like I'm a tech guy. Like that's me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think about my son, right? And my son could come to me and he can ask me a question and I would be just honest with him. He's like, "I want to do this," and I'm like, "Well, it's likely not going to work out, but I'll support you. How do you want me to help you?" Like I'm at least honest with him. I don't give him fairy tales or anything like that. And I think there's something about having that man who is just being honest with you. And I think much of our culture, people kind of say like our culture's become feminized to an extent where everything is soft. And some things should be soft, but not everything. And especially when it comes to life altering decisions, like what kind of profession you want to take on, right? And you need some honest, direct um, advice, and especially for young men. Sometimes you need a man to come to you and say something that you would not like to hear, but you actually need to hear it. And I think we need more of it. And I think I needed more of that when I was younger because I felt very, very much so lost. But as a father today, I'm very proud of where my son is because at
Mm.
19, he's way ahead as to where I was when I was 19 because he has me. Like I already went through the bumps and bruises um, to prepare him for the world. So he has a much better chance than I did. And what he decides to do is up to him, but at least I can give him solid advice along the way.
One of the best forms of healing is seeing your children be better off than you were as a child.
Yeah.
That is one of the best, but as a balm for the soul, that is something that cannot be matched. I came from a broken home. Now I was, incredibly blessed in that, that my family loved Christ and made sure I was in church, and I wasn't in an abusive home. A lot of people from broken homes cannot say that,
Mhm.
but I can say this: that seeing that my kids right now are in a better home growing up than I was in. It's not a slight on my parents. That's not every parent, wants to see their kid do better than they did.
Right.
But knowing that, at least hoping and praying, and this is a constant prayer of mine, that I do a decent enough job of raising my kids so that they never once question if their home is dysfunctional, and to see like a happiness with my kids right now from how they perceive their family, dude, that's not worth its weight in gold. That surpasses its weight in gold.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, my son means the world to me. I've said before that, we were talking about suicidal ideation, um, and losing hope and things like that. Like, I think in many ways my son kept me alive. Um, because in my early 20, I had my son when I was 21. My early 20s and my late teen years, I was a bit lost, um, and I wasn't exactly sure what to do and how to get there. And then boom, I have a kid, and I got to raise a man, and I'm not even a man myself. Like I don't know how to become a man. I didn't have a father to mimic, and I had to figure all that stuff out. But there was something more important than myself. Um, and it was important for me to take certain risks, to learn certain things, to be there for my son. Um, so there's something incredible about children when you do open up your heart, um, and allow kids to get close to you. Like I'll tell you this, my son allowed for me to like hug, you know. Um, I think for a long time I didn't even like really hug my mother. And so hugging wasn't like a thing, like an expression for me. But then you got this little boy who wants to hug his father. Um, and that means everything. Even to this day, he's 19, he's bigger than me. He's like 6'1". Um, and whenever he comes over, he says, I love you, and we hug. Every time we talk on the phone, when we hang up, love you, and we hang up. So my son allowed for me to truly express and receive love unconditionally. Um, and that's a beautiful thing that I think I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate.
I just got a message from my wife while you were explaining that I think, at least for me, probably frames this to a T. My grandfather was a brilliant electrician. God rest his soul. Brilliant man. My dad is an incredibly handy guy. He can find a way to get it done. And they never really sat down and taught me a lot of that stuff. My grandfather had dementia and couldn't by the time I was really old enough to take it. And my dad was busy working and providing for us. So he didn't really have, he tried. And by the way, it has done a phenomenal job at bringing me up to speed in some areas. He also made sure when I was in high school that I was working around good guys in our church that would teach me a lot of that stuff, which, we'll have to bring you back to talk about the importance of placing your kids around those who can do what you cannot. Because I noticed a few references to that kind of thing in the book that I'd love to pull on that thread and see where it leads to. And just as the teaser behind it, I want to talk about something that I think is an incredibly important link between those in the inner city and the middle American Black communities and those in kind of the down hick home Midwestern white and mixed communities, because there are some really deep links there between the expert in the community. Like the SNL accidentally bumped into this one on their Black Jeopardy with Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And he's like, you had a guy, Keenan's, oh, I have a guy. Oh, you got my guy Cecil, he can do everything in the neighborhood. They like barely touched on the old guy that you could learn something from. Mm-hmm. Sorry, if we do this again, we're going to get Spencer Clavin in here too, so we can talk about the philosophy behind all this stuff. I'm so sorry, Adam.
It's all good.
ADHD is a heck of a thing. But I really, really enjoyed hearing about you talk about the relationship you have with your son. I love having you talk about how there's something new that you can bring into your life with your kids that wasn't present when you were growing up.
Yeah.
And it's one of those moments that I think about when I actually build something with my daughter and I show her how it works. It's something that my dad may not have been able to do with me, but I get to show her, here's why when we're doing this, the structure matters here. And I come back by her room, I don't know, a week later, and she's building the Lego blocks in the manner that I described. That may sound very trivial to some people, but it really hits home. And I'm just glad that you took a moment to mention that, because seeing those kind of things as a parent, that's something you couldn't even begin to share in the emotion of in a way that could be understood to someone who's not a parent.
Yeah.
But we don't talk, but we need to talk about these things. It's like, this is one of the reasons you need to become a parent. This is one of the reasons you need to get married, and you need to even if it doesn't work out and you're in a situation in which you're in a broken home, you still need to throw all the investment into having kids and raising your kids and sticking with your kids, because these are moments that are never talked about on the big screen, but they far surpass almost anything else.
Yeah. I actually had something recent. My background's in IT, and I've been building my personal computers for years now. So
sure, same.
My son, when he was actually, what was he, like 13 or so, 13, 14, I found it was like, we'll build a computer. He's like, all right. And we got all the parts, went to the store, got the parts, brought them here. And I showed him what to do and I explained what everything was as he was putting the computer together. And I would tell him, like, what this is. Here, you put in the RAM stick. Right, I'll put in one, he'll put in the next one. So he can at least like feel it and do it himself. So that was years ago. And he's been having the same computer for quite some time. I think it was like 14. So he's had the computer for about 5 years. He's added like a hard drive. He's very small things. So it was like a month or so ago. He calls me, less than a month ago. He calls me, he's like, hey, Dad, I bought some computer parts. I'm going to build another computer. I just got a question for you about Windows 11. And so we're just having this conversation. And a couple days later, he sent me a picture. He's like, I did it. It's all done. And he's got the computer laid out. It's all powered up and everything. And I was just so proud. And I told him, like, I'm so proud of you. Because what I told him years ago, he remembered everything to put it all together from scratch.
Now, if he really wanted to impress you, he would have set the phone up on the tripod and he would have given you the honor of taking a peek at the very first time you press the I/O button to see if it turns on. Because boy, that's the but let's be real. Does anybody ever actually record that?
No. But I know we know that experience where it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Did I hook up the right pin? Or did I put it in backwards?
I have to replace the power supply in the bottom of the unit that I built in college, and I've been upgrading ever since. And I'm still using the first power supply. And I've built a couple of computers here in the studio by now. I worked IT in college, and I am nervous about digging the power supply out and replacing it. So I understand what it means to. I'll probably send a picture after I replace the power supply to the mentor that I had who taught me IT. Like the inside stuff when I was in college, because you do that. I mean, sharing things with a mentor is incredibly important.
Yeah.
I can't imagine yet, because my kids aren't old enough to receive something like that from your kids. I can only expect that it's an over the moon kind of feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I was very, very proud. And it's not necessarily because I'm an IT guy and he's doing computer thing. If he showed me something else where I gave him explicit instructions, especially like it wasn't like it was a month ago, it was years ago, that we put it together from scratch. And he's also looked up stuff online and he was telling me about websites that he found and all this other stuff. And he was researching, and I was just like, look at this kid. Like, especially from a father's perspective, we want our kids to be somewhat independent, right? Especially the older that they get, where they're not always looking for your approval to do something or for you to do it for them. It's like, go on a limb and just look it up, give it a shot, And he didn't call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing it. He called me and said, I bought it. I just got a quick question for you. And he already did all. And matter of fact, I was like, now, are you sure about this? He's like, yeah, I already went to this website, matched up the parts, everything's good. I was like, all right, you got this. So yeah, it was a very proud moment for me to see him, take some of what I showed him, have the confidence, because working with computers, a lot of it is about confidence, especially like the first time you take stuff apart. But having the confidence to start from scratch, put it all together, and everything work out is absolutely wonderful.
All right, folks, let's cut right over to some of the breaking news coming right out of D.C. itself. This would be that the Supreme Court of the United States has in fact ruled against Judge James Boasberg, the chief district judge over in Washington, D.C., says, per curiam, this is on April 7th in the evening, this matter concerns the detention and removal of Venezuelan nationals believed to be members of the Tren de Aragua, an entity that the State Department has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. And then, again, a series of citations regarding to laws in the United States, laws regarding to how these particular statutes affect both the president, affect the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the military in general, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, essentially making the point that the President of the United States does in fact have the right, under the Alien Enemies Act, to deport, to remove foreign alien enemies who are members of terrorist organizations designated by the State Department to a jurisdiction that the President of the United States finds appropriate. So the real catch here is he says, and this is the Chief Justice Roberts pointing this out here, that the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States, 5 detainees and a putative class sought injunctive and declaratory relief against the implementation of and the removal under the proclamation. So initially, the detainees sought relief in habeas, among other causes of action, but they dismissed their habeas claims. The District Court for the District of Columbia issued 2 temporary restraining orders, preventing any removal of the named plaintiffs and preventing removal under the Alien Enemies Act of a provisionally certified class consisting of any non-citizens who might be subject to the proclamation. So what James Boasberg did is he issued some kind of an injunctive freeze with the goal of keeping the Trump administration from removing known members of terrorist organizations, again, designated so by the State Department, Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang, and MS-13, the Mexican drug and human trafficking cartel. Those terrorist organizations have members in the United States. Some of those members, for example, like MS-13, may or may not be U.S. citizens. Some of those members are likely to be non-citizens, in other words, illegal aliens into the country, or alien migrants, depending on what they did when they came into the United States and what they declared as their method of entry. So an illegal immigrant is when someone comes into the country and just resides here. A type of illegal immigrant that comes here and claims asylum incorrectly is an illegal migrant. And what you had was individuals, part of the illegal immigrant class and their various designated categories, that were coming into the United States, whether at the open invitation of Joseph R. Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, and were then basically causing all of the havoc that they found necessary, up to and including rape and murder of women and children. And the Biden administration did absolutely nothing about it. In fact, they tried passing off more and more and more asylum to individuals from Venezuela. And all they asked them was, hey, are you a member of any foreign gangs? What do you think? The person's going to say yes? It's like saying, you seem to have tattoos that say Tren de Aragua and, tattoos relating to the worship of Santa Muerte and the angel of death. That's kind of suspicious on, an average family guy. That's a little bit weird. Maybe you shouldn't be in the country. Hey, are you a member of a foreign gang? And the person's like, nah, come on. This isn't Die Bart Die. This is the Bart the. It's German. And to quote the old Simpsons joke. And then they were just let into the country. And then blue state and blue city prosecutors failed to keep those who were arrested for minor crimes and illegal aliens and keep them in custody because they saw it as far better to waltz in and suggest that, it was because of socioeconomic factors. We can't hold these individuals because they're brown or they appear to be from a different country. And that would be racist to hold individuals like, we're going to restorative justice this whole situation. That was the Biden administration's policy towards the illegal immigration crisis in this country. And it cost lives. And it didn't just cost lives in a numerical or a statistical kind of situation here. When I say it cost lives, I mean that it cost the lives of women and children doing kinds of various activities which can't even possibly hold any kind of suspected score. It's not like they were going down to Mexico and then they were venturing out from the resort into the criminally controlled neighborhoods of Mexican cities. No, what were these individuals doing? What were these women who were raped and murdered by these particular Venezuelan and Mexican cartels doing? They were walking at night on their campus, at their own universities, in their own neighborhoods, in the territory of the United States. And it is an insidious situation that the United States federal government, under the argument of Alejandro Mayorkas, the then Secretary of Homeland Security, made the distinct decision, the pointed decision, not to, maybe consider that we should remove the criminal elements who have committed heinous acts, but to say, no, there's no crisis at all. And even if there was a crisis, these incidents are exceptionally rare. That was the argument they used. It was a terrible argument then. It cost additional lives. It resulted in apartment buildings in places like Aurora, Colorado, being taken over by violent gangs, just to see news producers later try to tut Vice President J.D. Vance and say, well, but those were only, a few apartment complex buildings, actually that isn't something so serious. Just one apartment building on American soil, along with the murders that should never have occurred because those individuals who were released into this country should not have been here in the first place. And that is at the feet of individuals like Alejandro Mayorkas. And you may say, well, Tony, where is Alejandro Mayorkas now? Is he going to answer for the complete failure of the Biden administration? And the answer to that is a friend of the show and a colleague, Julio Rosas, actually spotted this clown in an airport and tried to get him to, engage in, just a bit of a conversation. Tried to, ask particularly the former Secretary of Homeland Security, hey, you're out here making all of these claims during the Biden administration. Now we've seen the border situation under the Trump administration basically be reduced to next to no crossings per day whatsoever. It's the first issue that pushed away the American economy as the number one concern of the taxpayer in over a decade. And we do actually have that particular clip. Alejandro Mayorkas, who at first was really friendly, really happy to go up and talk to Julio Rosas, kind of introduce himself, say hello, very quickly became dead silent and wouldn't speak to him more. Here you go.
Yes.
Julio Rosas, Blaze Media.
Oh, pleasure.
How you doing? How you doing,
Fine. How are you?
I just wanted to ask you how it feels to see that the United States has a secure border now that President Trump is in office, as opposed to when you were Secretary of Homeland Security.
All of a sudden, he can't speak.
Do you have any regret facilitating an open border, sir? Border crossings are down 95%.
Special security announcement. Please maintain control.
Do you regret allowing Tren de Aragua to gain a foothold in the United States, sir?
Unattended baggage is subject to search, inspection, damage, and removal.
You don't have anything to say, sir, about your time as Homeland Security Secretary? Facilitating an open border?
So, of course, he had nothing to say. That went on for another 2 minutes. He tried to evade Julio because, again, the individuals who pushed these gang members on citizens of the United States, refusing to uphold federal law, as President Trump has proven, there weren't new laws that needed to be presented. You didn't need new legislation, bipartisan, and have the Senate pass. So you need 4,000 illegals a day to cross the border. And then the president or the Homeland Security Secretary or the Attorney General can choose to shut the border, but not for longer than 20 days. Then the border has to open back up. And also you need additional ports of entry and this kind of convoluted nonsense that Biden and Harris ran on as being this ultimate sunshine solution that was crap, claiming that Trump told them all not to pass it so it would be an ultimate crisis until he got in and passed a bill. And then Trump came in and he appointed Tom Homan as border czar and he shut the border. And not only that, he then sent ICE into neighborhoods in which there were known members of Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang and cartel, and MS-13, the Mexican gang and cartel, and members of the Sinaloa gang and cartel, and sent ICE in to grab those individuals and remove them because the State Department under Marco Rubio had designated those organizations as terrorist organizations, which they are. And then he started the alien removal process under the Alien Enemies Act, and the left lost their mind about it. Oh, he's going to be deporting fathers from Maryland of autistic children and women with cancer. Oh, it's a wartime law from the 1700s. Oh, the horrors, the shame. Oh, God help us all. And then it turned out that they did have one last trick up their sleeve. If they could not deport, if they could not impeach President Donald Trump this time around so far, because they don't have a majority in the House. And they can't remove him because they don't have a majority in the Senate. And they can't impede the appointment and the confirmation of individuals like Tom Homan and Marco Rubio and Kristi Noem to their positions in the Trump administration. And if they can't actually go through and fire people, or if they can't impede the firing of individuals in the Trump administration because they are members of the executive branch of government serving at the behest of the President of the United States, then what do they have? Well, Chuck Schumer came out in front of everyone and made it quite clear that, you don't need to worry about, anything here, there, and anywhere. You don't need to be concerned because what the federal government has up its sleeve on the Democrat side of things is they have federal judges.
There are those who believe that we are in real time living through an assault on the constitutional order. Do you believe that we are in a constitutional crisis right now?
Yes, our democracy is at risk because Donald Trump shows that he wishes to violate the laws in many, many different ways. The good news here is we did put 235 judges, progressive judges not under the control of Trump
Progressive judges. That is like saying conservative. The opposite of conservative is not liberal. The opposite of conservative is progressive. They put over 200 progressive judges in over the last 10 years. They've put through even more. So he's talking about these judges that they have. And James Boasberg, being the Chief Justice of the D.C. District Court, he was appointed by Barack Obama to the Superior Court in to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Before that, he was appointed by George Bush, where he served on the Superior Court for District of Columbia from 2002 to 11. And then Obama drops him over on the district level as the Chief Justice of that particular role. And Schumer brags about the number of justices who are activists. And I don't mean essentially activists. They, like several other members, both in D.C. and around the country, have ruled on particular cases regarding the Trump administration, and they have tried freezing and thawing certain injunctions levied against the Trump administration on wild readings of the Constitution. In many cases, just making up stuff. And what do I mean by making up stuff? I mean that you actually had a judge regarding in the D.C. court, making the case that the Trump administration could not forbid members with mental illnesses, as such transgenderism, from serving in the military. And her argument was a quote from the musical Hamilton. Not that the Constitution, really lays out these particular things, and according to federal law, the president doesn't have the authority. No, the military answers to the commander-in-chief. That's kind of why the presidential election is so important. And suggesting this absolutely floors me. This was Anna, Keys, who made this particular case. She said, the court's opinion is long, but its premise is simple. The self-evident truth that all people are created equal, and then she has a footnote to cite her source, all means all, nothing more and certainly nothing less. So when she says all people are created equal here, what is she citing? She says footnote 5, quote, women were, quote, included in the sequel, quote, when the passage of the 19th Amendment granted them the right to vote in 1920. See Lin-Manuel Miranda, Hamilton, an American musical. And those are the exact kind of reasons that federal judges are laying out particular arguments for against the Trump administration that are infringing on the separation of powers in which the U.S. Constitution clearly outlines what the duties of Congress, the executive branch under the President of the United States, and the judicial branch under the Supreme Court and the federal judges are to carry out. And the latest series of actions by James Boasberg had become so ridiculously partisan that he, as the Chief Justice, started jumping in on the rotation of justices in D.C. to take cases that are supposed to be randomly filed. Allow me to explain what goes on. So, according to the documents that are released monthly, but that were released in February of 2025, there were 5 D.C. justices who's basically they're like on call. Like a doctor or an EMT. And these particular justices would be on standby in case any high-level emergency need to be taken up immediately kind of cases make it to the court. And there were, I think, 5 or 6 justices that were listed on this rotation, none of whom were Chief Justice of the D.C. Court, James Boasberg. Not a one of them. And it just so happened, I know, I too am rather shocked, that when a case came up that needed an emergency assignment, the person who was set to be the justice over a particular case if an emergency popped up in that span of dates didn't get assigned the position. In fact, Judge James Boasberg ended up taking the case. Wow, a guy not even in the random wheel of judges got randomly assigned a case. That was strange. And then yesterday, another case against the Trump administration got randomly assigned to Justice Boasberg. Wow, that is so strange that this judge, who argued that it was heinous and horrible and terrible and evil and all this stuff that the Trump administration was simply carrying out the law, made the decision to then assign himself to political high-value cases against the Trump administration, where he issued weird injunctions and freezes that didn't even have to do with the court system in the United States interpreting the Constitution and ruling on particular lawsuits, but this new branch of, well, you need to bring these troops back right away. Well, you need to do that. Well, you need to not export any more individuals over in the United States that are here illegally to foreign imprisonment that are members of terror organizations. That kind of stuff. Absolutely not. And by the way, this injunction became a national freeze that the executive branch could not actually carry out its orders. And Americans consistently knocked on the doors of the Supreme Court. Hey, there is no reason, Americans said, that the judicial federal districts are making rules that affect those in Indiana and Colorado and California and Texas and Wisconsin. Why are they allowed to issue these sweeping national injunctions? And now the Supreme Court has ruled 5-4, So that would be the 3 liberal justices and 1 quote-unquote textualist or originalist justice joining the liberals to make it 4, and then 5 of the conservative justices upheld the president's authority. Now, I made a bit of a prediction a while ago. I said, who is your least favorite conservative judge over on the Supreme Court? I said, oh, it's easy. Amy Coney Barrett is my least favorite. And they said, why? And I said, because Amy Coney Barrett, based on her personal convictions, does not believe in the original framework of the United States Constitution under the context the Founding Fathers wrote it in. In her graduate work, Amy Coney Barrett has consistently sided with the idea that some elements of the U.S. Constitution evolve over time to the point they take on a new cultural context. You're like, what are you talking about? I mean that Amy Coney Barrett believes that over time, tradition usurps textual authority. Now, you find this in a theological argument that I'm not going to get into right now, especially considering that a good portion of our audience is Catholic. And though I am, in fact, a Baptist, this does indeed draw a bit of a problem from some individuals' interpretation of Catholic doctrine. And the idea that you can simply toss out parts of Scripture that you don't like because tradition usurps them. Amy Coney Barrett has, in fact, as a Supreme Court justice, embodied that particular nonsense time and time again. And by the way, that's not an insult to Catholics at all. That is a false and poorly interpreted version of Catholic theology that Amy Coney Barrett consistently brings to the Supreme Court of the United States, where she believes that, well, I mean, sure, the president should have executive authority, but if you interpret it in this modern nonsensical way, then it has all of these exceptions and quid pro quos and a few things over here. And that's nonsensical. And so while many have made the case that Chief Justice Roberts is the squish of the Supreme Court, I have argued, and I will continue to argue, that it is Amy Coney Barrett who sides with the liberal justices on cases that make absolutely no sense whatsoever to side with the liberal justices over. Making the case that, well, actually, the president really shouldn't be using a law outside of wartime. Like, what are you talking about? The Alien Enemies Act does not state anywhere at all that foreign immigrants into this country who did not receive visas, who did not receive any particular favor from the government under established law, individuals who were part of designated terrorist organizations. There is no magical, mystical, special code of process and amazing citizen level due process that's entitled to these individuals. I'm sorry. If you want due process in this country and you do not have a visa, you should be a citizen of the United States. Coming here illegally and then whining about due process is like me walking into a Burger King and immediately yelling at the kitchen that I don't have my order. I didn't order anything. I didn't pay for anything. Why are you yelling at the kitchen for not giving you a meal? You haven't done the stuff required to get the meal. And now you have individuals from foreign nations that are coming into the country and going, where is my due process? You didn't do the stuff required for due process. You cut in line all of the people from Mexico and Central America and South America and Europe and the Middle East and Africa and Asia and Oceania who wanted to come into this country, and they waited in line to immigrate legally. You cut in line. Not to mention, there's very good evidence that you are a member of a foreign terror organization. And you're like, wait a minute, you need to give me my lawyer and prove that I'm a member. Says who? You're not supposed to be here. You crossed the border illegally. You're not a citizen of the United States. You're not a legal resident. Where's your visa? It is ridiculous to suggest that we need to have some superior standard morality, that really what we have are everyone's a citizen of this country because, we're nice people and therefore we have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're a member of a foreign terrorist organization. What's your evidence for that, by the way? Why does the United States have to prove that you're a member? If you are suspected as a member of a foreign terrorist organization, you realize that if I go to fly and the TSA thinks that I might be carrying a bomb, they can search me? Because I am. giving up part of my rights to privacy when I choose to fly commercially in the United States. When I buy a ticket, that's in the print of the terms and conditions I accept. If you cross into this country and the federal government believes that you might have committed some kind of a crime, or you might be a domestic terrorist member, or excuse me, not a foreign terrorist member, then yeah, they should be allowed to boot you. Now, a citizen? No, a citizen, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. Citizens should not be deported or removed. And visas can be canceled at the request of the State Department. So for the Supreme Court to rule in this particular case, to rule against Judge Boasberg is not a major move for the Supreme Court. This is not a, oh, wow, these justices are amazing. Oh, thank God, they're so wonderful. Let's throw them a parade. No, this is the baseline that is expected of the Supreme Court. You're not special for interpreting the Constitution and current law and precedent in the United States correctly. I have kids. The oldest one is now pretty much potty trained. I don't liberally praise her every time now my child goes to the potty. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm not going to take a 20-year-old man stepping out of the bathroom going, hey, good job, bud, you used the bathroom all by yourself. Why would I praise a Supreme Court justice who is supposed to know more about the U.S. Constitution and federal law than anyone else in the U.S. for interpreting the law correctly? That's what we expect of you. That's your job. And the idea that I'm supposed to sit here and pretend that the Supreme Court, and by the way, does this say like I'm not happy that the Supreme Court made, of course I'm happy the Supreme Court made the decision, but I'm not going to jump over the moon, freaking out and oh, this is what an unexpected surprise. They should be ruling this way. The separation of power goes all ways. The judicial and the executive should be separate. The judicial and the legislative should be separate. The legislative and the executive should be separate. That's why they're separate articles in the Constitution. And to be clear, the dissent that we're just now getting in here over at the Daily Signal is not even paper thin. It's so porous, even the Swiss won't tariff it for cheese. Justice Sotomayor, with whom Justice Kagan and Justice Jackson join in, and with whom Justice Barrett joins, as to parts 2 and 3B, dissenting. I gotta tell you, Justices Sotomayor and Jackson, the lady who can't tell you what a woman is, maybe not the best kinds of company to keep in legal cases. 3 weeks ago, the federal government started sending scores of Venezuelan immigrants detained in the United States to a foreign prison in El Salvador. If you begin a sentence with the word scores as though you're trying to suggest that this is some incredibly large amount of people, scores, you couldn't just name the number that you know good and well we all have. Well, you have to make it scores of individuals. Scores, Martha. Oh, can you believe scores? Perhaps 77, as Abraham once said. Nonsense. It did so without any due process of law, under the auspices of the Alien Enemies Act, a 1798 law designed for times of war. If you're a Supreme Court justice and you begin your opinion by, that's an old law, you're retarded. And I don't mean you have special needs. I mean you're the kind of retarded that is used as the term for people being willful, stupid idiots. Who refute, it's a 1798 law. Oh man, well I have a 1789 document the whole freaking country's built on. It's called the Constitution of the United States. The Declaration of Independence is a foundation for a lot of law. Does that 1776 document get you down? The 20th Amendment's looking a little old at this point. Still kind of foundational for women having the authority to vote. You think if I call the IRS regarding the 17th Amendment, is the 17th the income tax? I think 17th? Yeah. I said, look, I know the 17th Amendment says that I'm supposed to pay an income tax, but hey, it's a really old law. I mean, think about it. Were you around when they wrote it? I don't think so. Ridiculous. Retarded. it did so without any due process of law. Why is it that only the U.S. government is ever the organization that has to follow due process of law? If a foreign entity, and to be clear, members of Tren de Aragua are in fact a foreign entity, that is an organization outside the jurisdiction of the United States that operates in another country, foreign jurisdiction, right? 16th Amendment, not the 17th Amendment. Thank you, producer Daniel. Thanks for clarifying that. The idea that someone else gets to completely ignore the rule of law as a foreign entity, and then the United States has to stop everything and say, yes, you can stay at the taxpayer's expense. We'll give you 3 meals a day and room in a United States holding facility and maybe some parole and, maybe a little bit of bail. So you go out and you murder another couple nursing students from the South. Because that's how, New York does it. You have James Boasberg going, oh no, don't, the guy with the tear tattoos and the Santa Muerte tattoo. Oh, God forbid you get him out of the country. After all, he showed such good faith coming into the country as an illegal immigrant and evading Border Patrol and federal enforcement. It's not like these individuals were like working 9 to 5 day jobs going, all right, honey, I got to go to work. Don't tell anyone I'm an illegal immigrant from Venezuela. ICE had to go into neighborhoods and hunt these individuals down because guess what? They didn't want to be found. Did they go through the due process of contacting Immigrations, Customs, and Enforcement going, yes, hello, I would like to become a member of the United States of America? Because that's what the people who came here legally chose to do. They came to a port of entry. Whether back in the day, I know this is a little old, but Ellis Island, or now during modern ports of entry in U.S. airports and in cities in foreign nations, you can go to the consulate and apply for citizenship. These crazy things called websites you can access on the smartphones everyone seems to have, where they're getting their advice from Venezuelan gang members on how to squat illegally in other people's homes. Gee, you can apply for citizenship on an app. Amazing. But they don't do that. No, they cross illegally and then they hide. And then when the government comes in and says, you look like a gang member. Well, that's really terrible. How can you say that? I'm sorry. You look like a gang member. Your head is shaved. You're covered in tattoos. You're not working a normal job. Well, but there's a lot of citizens who look like that. Yeah, well, then there's a lot of citizens who look like gang members. But after they show me their license or their passport or another piece of identification labeling them as a citizen, they can go about their merry way looking like an idiot. That's fine. But if you're here and you're not a citizen and you look like a duck and you quack like a duck, you can join the other ducks in being shuttled off to the El Salvador prison. And as to the Maryland father of the autistic child who shouldn't have been deported, he committed capital crimes in El Salvador. I don't know if you know anything about capital crimes, but that's human trafficking, sexual abuse, and murder. And now he's back in his homeland of El Salvador. Oh, I can't go home because I fear for my safety. If you committed a lot of rapes and murders in El Salvador, I don't think you'd want to go back to El Salvador either. Interesting how that works. And I'm supposed to sit here and cry, oh man, this is just terrible. Oh, how horrible that there are individuals here in this particular country who aren't supposed to be here. Just taking a look at the comments because I do particularly enjoy one particular question. You should get, they should come round your A up and take you to effing Supermex prison in Venezuela. How about that, mother bleeper? Well, see, they can't take me because I have this cool thing called citizenship in the United States. And it's listed on my driver's license and passport and birth certificate and social security card and other legal ID. You know who doesn't have that? Venezuelan gang members who come into the country illegally. By the way, you know whom this policy is really popular with? Legal Hispanic immigrants in this country. How do I know that? Oh, because I speak fluent Spanish, lived with families from Nicaragua and Honduras when I was in college, and I'm very close with members of the Delavan Hispanic community in Wisconsin and the west side of Indianapolis Hispanic community. Those are both popular places where legal immigrants from Latin American countries go. And it just so turns out that people who waited here in line and did everything right and are paying all the necessary taxes that they're supposed to, and so they're getting screwed over just like you and I, citizens of the United States. They really don't like it when someone comes in and skips steps. By the way, no, that is not true. The individual who was deported to Maryland did not, in fact, have an official driver's license for the United States. And by the way, being married to a citizen doesn't, in fact, give you legal status and right to avoid deportation if you are suspected of being a gang member of the United States. In the United States, a gang member of a foreign entity here in the United States. So by the way, to those over on the left who are losing their ever-loving mind because the Supreme Court ruled, not this major, amazing, brand new, groundbreaking, never would have believed it kind of style ruling that changes the United States, but one that simply states the President of the United States is in fact allowed and encouraged to uphold the written law of the United States. If you're freaking out about that, by all means, in the easiest time for the Democrats to possibly gain a little bit of ground against Trump regarding tariffs or economic policy or international relationships, what have you, in the lowest bar possible to climb, please keep sitting on these issues. Keep sitting on the fact that we shouldn't be getting rid of illegal immigrant criminal gang members from Venezuela, that we shouldn't be revoking the visas of pro-Hamas terrorist sympathizers who, if they stated that on their visa application, would have been denied access to the United States. And also keep siding with the LGBTQ plus 2IA insane policy, like those coming out of Colorado, that would designate any parent who doesn't affirm their child's gender transition as being guilty of child abuse under family law in the state, therefore creating a situation in which parents would lose access and custody rights. Go ahead, keep siding with the 20 issues, and then sit there dumbfounded as you continue to lose every single election, when meanwhile you have people like Peter Navarro, Scott Bessent, Elon Musk, and Howard Lutnick in the Trump administration who are in open disagreement with each other about economic policy. It is the lowest bar. All you have to do is point to it, which you can't because the left-wing policy on the economy has been tariffs like since the 60s. The lowest bar ever. And you guys are going to sit here and whine and complain about something that other Democrat presidents before Biden openly stated was a baseline that you couldn't cross. You have to deport or remove members of foreign terror organizations. And the idea that these are just innocent, family, grandmas and just fathers of special education. Oh, how could those evil Republicans do? Oh, it's so terrible. How? Oh, the man has an autistic child. That means he's not a gang member. Ah, yes. It's guaranteed that if you're a gang member, you have no children or wife. And that means you also can't have children. And if you do, they all come out looking like miniature gang members. No. It turns out that gang members and members of terror organizations do, in fact, I know this is going to sound a little shocking to you, have kids who are just normal children. That doesn't mean you get to hide behind them and the federal government can't touch you because you have kids. If I commit a crime, the federal government, rightly so, comes and takes me away. You see this in the Middle East right now. You have Hamas terrorists who are hiding behind women and children and saying, oh, you can't touch us because that'll make you genocidal or whatever. If a man robs a bank and then goes home and holds his family hostage, that does not mean that the police or the government can't come in and remove him. You don't get to hold families hostage in order to continue breaking the law. No sympathy at all whatsoever. And telling us that it's like Tim Walz, I become a friend to school shooters, or telling us that you know gang members, so therefore you know he's not a gang member. It's like saying, well, I know gay people and he's not gay, or, well, I can't be racist. I'm best friends with people that are this color. Spare us. It's an 80-20 issue. And the longer that you keep clinging desperately, sadly, pathetically to some fantasy of affirmative kinds of inclusive nonsense, instead of recognizing the necessity of keeping Americans who are of all colors and all races and all religions and creeds safe from the predations of people who should not be here, cut in line to be here, broke the law to be here, well, then you have, in fact, brought this upon yourself. And so with that bit of breaking news and a little bit of the bonus tone side of things, again, the Supreme Court has ruled 5-4 in favor of the Trump administration. They've ruled against James Boasberg, which means that the Trump administration will, and I can't wait, be sending out additional videos of these gang members being sent to El Salvador, where they will be for a very, very, very long time. And I tell you what, if I see Kristi Noem standing in a video in front of the gang members, and there's like a really nice person with like no tattoos, who's just like a sweet, innocent old man sitting there, we'll talk about it. But as long as I continue to see gang members standing behind bars, it's going to be an 80-20 issue. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for sticking around. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.